was in there for some. No, you want to
Makes you stop.
Yeah.
Look and see. Cool.
Primarily.
myself
On behalf of Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh and the Pennslvania Department, I'd like to welcome you to the lecture hall. My name is Barry Chad. I'm Assistant Head of the Pennslvania Department. And first, I want to say that Ray Duquesne is a man who gets his money worth from the library. Much of the research that you're going to see here tonight was accomplished through the Carnegie Library. And I think Mr. Carnegie would enjoy the fact that he used the library so extensively. Ray Duquesne is a writer and director who studied filmmaking, communications, screenwriting at Penn State University, and is a member of the American Film Institute. He is a member of Pittsburgh Filmmakers and a board member of the Pittsburgh Film Workers Association. He hosted and produced his own show on local cable TV for 3 years and has worked on the films Darrow, Silence of the Lambs, Bob Roberts, Sudden Death, Desperate Measures, A Promise Kept, the Oksana Bayul Story, among others. He is involved with Two Wings and a Prayer film productions, in which he's trying to make a film about what he's going to be talking about tonight. He's trying to raise $5 million. This past fall, Ray gave a presentation on the inventor Nikola Tesla, and it was a great success. In the course of Ray's comments tonight, he will be introducing a couple of special guests. I'd like to introduce Ray Duquesne.
Thank you very much for showing tonight. A poem. You call me a Don Quixote, and well it might that be, for fighting windmill dragons that I alone can see, for crying out for justice, for honor and for right, for pointing out the goblins that stalk you in the night. You laugh both loud and strongly at my long and lonely quest, and in dull and rusted armor I must bear that painful test. As I come back down from battle on old and spindly legs, I can see you run to mock me past many dragon eggs that block the path between us, but which you will not see. You say there are no dragons, so eggs they cannot be. My arm it aches from battle, and my brow is bloodied still, but 'tis you I hold in pity as I trudge back down this hill. For those eggs will soon be dragons, and greater be the lies you must tell to one another, lest you heed your doubting eyes. 'Tis I, you say, are dreaming, fighting things which cannot be, but 'tis you I see as dreaming, as the world may someday see. So laugh your laugh, my brothers, 'tis later than you think, for in that last great futile charge, I made that windmill blink. By Robert H. Johns. Robert H. Johns is going to show up in the program here tonight. He was one of the early investigators into this bomber mystery that we own, or it owns us over the years, depending on how you want to look at it. And we'll be seeing him. However, before Robert Johns, on January 31st, 1956, a B-25 Mitchell Army Air Force bomber taking off from Las Vegas, Nevada, carrying a mysterious cargo, mysteriously lost power and ditched into the dark waters of the Monongahela River, just outside of Pittsburgh, in Homestead, Pennsylvania. Despite costly and coordinated efforts with a long list of searches and investigators, it has disappeared without a trace and has never been seen again. Or has it? That is the question I pose to you tonight. And together we will piece together many of the complex, very human parts of this puzzle. Let us start at the very beginning, when the public first became aware of what happened that day, when the news first broke. This is 1956 KDKA video. Let's start with the It's a little old, so it's taking its time to get here. This is lost footage. This was thrown out. KDK threw this out in the late 70s, early 70s, I'm sorry. Here we see the men being brought in. This is trucker Don Devine. He rescued one of the drowning victims from the plane. And if you could see, when they brought in the guy on the stretcher, I don't know if it was so quick, they had the man's face covered. We'll find out more about that later. That's Don Devine, a trucker. Here's one of the pilots.
What did you think when you knew you were going to ditch?
Well, I looked for the worst, but expected the hope for the best. I hoped that everybody was going to get out of it all right.
And what were your first thoughts when you got out of that plane and you were on the wing?
My first thought was looking for a boat to get to the beach because that water looked awfully swift and cold.
How did you get out on the wing?
I came out through the emergency escape hatch, which I pulled immediately after we settled in the water, and got out into the water, and the other guys pulled me up on top of the wing.
Did you come down with a terrible crash?
The crash was relatively easy. The pilot settled the airplane, dished the airplane into the water very smoothly. We had a very nice landing.
Sergeant, was this your first crash experience?
No, I was in a crash at Yakutat, Alaska on New Year's Eve, 1950. We cracked up a C-54 out there, iced up severely, and had to make an emergency landing at Yakutat, and got bunged up a little bit.
Then how did you finally get out of the water here in Pittsburgh this afternoon?
I had to swim out. We got a hold of a log, and there was too many of us for the log, so I decided to let the other guys hang on to the log, and I struck out and swam out to shore.
How do you feel now?
I feel a lot better than I did 30 minutes ago. I was a little bit cold.
This is Sergeant Colosi with the Baldwin Police. He jumped in and bravely saved one. There's the polluted lawn as it looked back in 56. You can see the sludge. Now we'll be coming up on Don Devine again in the hospital. Instructor, there's Colosi looking over Sergeant Alvin, who we just saw speaking. He was crew chief. That guy right there talking was the crew chief of the plane, right underneath the two pilots. All right, thank you. Thank you, Larry. This is Major Dodson, the pilot of the craft at the time. He's looking a little nervous here. Maybe it's because of the interview, or maybe it's because of something else. See if you can recognize the reporter.
Major, what happened when the fuel indicator said you were out of fuel?
We turned south to go along the river, to the Allegheny Airport if possible.
Then what made you decide to go into the river?
The engines quit.
Did you have any doubt about ditching safely in the river?
I had no doubts whatsoever.
You brought it down in prescribed style?
In the prescribed, as prescribed by Air Force procedures, yeah.
Right here, that's either an Army Corps of Engineers or a Coast Guard boat doing some initial searching. Right there, they're testing, they're putting some thermometer or something in. And that's that. We'll stop the video here. Slides. This is the famous Filmette bomber image, which I'm currently using in my efforts to promote my film concerning this event. All right, we'll go back a little bit before 1956. Anybody recall World War II? A B-25 showing up. These B-25s end up in the weirdest places sometimes. This is when it smashed into the side of the Empire State Building, blew out 2 floors, the 78th, 79th floors. And it says 13 dead, 26 hurt, a lot of debris falling down and rocked the area. And before that, Jimmy Doolittle took the B-25s, of course, on a flight to Tokyo, the famous Tokyo raids of World War II. There we go, another picture from the time period. All right then. 17 minutes and the 7th man file. Per the X-Files, we have the 17th man file. This is the first day that the news broke. Here we see the men being, this is the front page of the Pittsburgh press, and they're being taken to the hospital. They're just being pulled out of the river. A lot of activity. The men don't look in very good shape at this point, except for one. He's off on the corner there, but that's Major Dodson. Here we have Sergeant Alfred Alleman, who you saw talking from the hospital bed. That's a picture of him with the nurse. A reporter witnessed the Mont plane crash. His name was White, and he was with the press. And he was driving across the bridge at the time and gave an eyewitness account. And it's pretty stirring. He talks about in very poetic terms. And just times froze still for those few seconds that it took for it to happen. And then it hit the water. Big geyser shot up. It went under the water for a little bit because it was a tail first landing, which is done in the correct fashion, and then he ends his report there because it just floats off and he went up around the bend out of sight. But we had a significant eyewitness there, an actual reporter going across the high level. Here we have Major Dodson, next to him Captain John Jameson, who shows up later on a radio show we'll be talking about shortly. Here's Sergeant Colossi again. They're sticking a thermometer in Mr. Alfred Altman's mouth, and he's very cold. I don't think they need him to do that. Figure that out. There's another picture. And another picture. He's starting to feel a little better there. And that's a nurse there. I'm not sure if that's Lillian O'Donnell or not. I'm not sure. But she'll pop up later in here. This is Dodson, shortly after his rescue. He's on board the Titan tugboat. And this is a man by the name of Brandon who was there with him. And this is when it just landed at the by the side of the river. And they allowed photographers on for a short bit, but suddenly they were all taken off and they weren't allowed to talk to them anymore. FBI men showed up, and certain government types, the FBI's always denied anybody was there. However, these men testified that they were on their boat shoving reporters away. Dodson's looking a little nervous there, but he's in pretty good shape there. He had a shower on board there, and he wasn't immediately taken to the hospital, whereas the other men were. We have 4 men surviving, 6 men total on the plane, 2 drowned. Their bodies, the 2 drowned victims, weren't found immediately, and neither was the plane, so there's this big mystery hanging for a few days there, and it was pretty intense. And we have, though, indications there was a 7th man on board. There were 6 men on the flight manifest, however, 7 men being pulled out of the river, and this is recorded by the Pittsburgh River Patrol and the tugboats when you add them all up. Dodson and Jameson were supposedly taken to one hospital together, Montefiore. But we found out later that Jameson wasn't there. There was a man with his name there, however, but it wasn't Jameson, according to Jameson's own testimony. There he is, Jameson, not in very good condition. He's not about to run around and end up in 2 different hospitals at the same time using the same name, because the man, he says he's in a completely different hospital at the same time. Dodson and this other man named Jameson are in Montefiore. There's Jameson, not even able to talk, he's cold. Don Devine, not in very good condition. He only spent a few minutes in the river. It was very cold that day. We have a man named Susie from Alaska, he drowns, and another Ingraham, he drowns. And the thing with Susie and Ingraham is they head off towards the north side of the shore, not towards the south. There are people there saying, come here, come this way. And they deliberately head to the north shore, whether it was because of confusion or because they didn't want to go to where a lot of people were. There's been that speculation. They didn't want to go. And one of them was seen carrying an attaché, a big case for like maps. And it may be assumed somebody was a courier with some kind of maps on board, but a lot of people saw them carrying a big case. that could have held maps. Here's Don Devine. Like I said, only a few minutes in the river, very cold. He's in bad shape. Okay. What we're going on through here, this is the 4 Air Force intelligence officers at Montefiore later that night. And they're ducking the cameras. They don't want their faces to be seen. And there's this one photograph. This photograph no longer exists in the official press archives. It wasn't there. Bob Johns, the later researcher, was able to grab this photo, but it's not in the press doesn't have it anymore. None of these pictures were ever published in the papers, even though a ton of pictures were taken. A lot of pictures disappeared from the archives, and it's very strange. But here they are, they're ducking out. They just finished talking to Dotson and this Jameson, not Jameson. Who is he? They're leaving. And after this, you see the reporter who took the picture, the Sun Telegraph photo, they had to fill out a little record. Here he writes, his name was Bruneck, plane crash, brass from the Air Force leaving Montefiore Hospital after talking to survivors of plane crash. These men made the hospital's policy of, quote, to hell with newspapers, quote, unquote, a lot stronger. In other words, they put you start to see the blankets starting to come down over things here. There's a lot less information from this point on going out to the public. This man here, a lot of men have speculated, might have been Howard Hughes. He was on board the plane. This is one of the first theories we get, that Howard Hughes was on board. He did a lot of stuff for the government with a lot of technology and stuff and with planes, so who knows. And he doesn't look very military. That's the thing that got a lot of researchers and a lot of military men look and say he's a little too sloppy, his hair's too long and greasy. You see the full photo, he just doesn't look military. It's like he threw on these clothes. Who is this guy? Never been able to find out. None of the researchers have. This guy, Robert Johns thought he looked like somebody. I've not been able to dig up from his Robert Johns archives who he thought he was. Do you know who? Joe DiNardo? I don't know. Joe DiNardo was out at Pitt at the time. He was an Air Force officer. He did the weather report, worked up the weather part of the report on this crash. So Joe was out there. Here we go. After all that, the police keep looking for this. They have their launch out there. They never find it. They give up. Here we have the Army Corps of Engineers. For about 2 weeks, the search went on. It totaled about $1,400 cost to the government. There was a coordinated effort between the Coast Guard, between the Army Corps of Engineers, and the local police. And nothing, not about a week into it, the Air Force pulls out officially, and they have no further interest in it. The Army Corps of Engineers then takes over as the primary agent in charge of this, with the Coast Guard supporting. They use all the state-of-the-art equipment at the time. They dredge back and forth, don't find anything, and they finally have to call it off because it's too expensive. And there we have the Manila. That's one of the cranes looking for it. Here we have a barge from the Ohio Barge Line. They thought they found it. They pulled it up. About the next day after the crash, they lifted up something they thought was a wing. They couldn't tell. It slips off very quickly. They then attach another hook to it. It snaps. Whatever's there is so heavy. These 2-inch cables snap. And these things can hold a lot of poundage. And so they put a marker buoy there. You can see off the left corner, they put the little marker buoy, and it's going to stay there overnight until they can come back the next day to resume the search and possibly recover it. Hip hip hooray, here we have the photographer saying just that. Tugboat from Ohio Barge Line, it's scene of wreckage. Buoy marks the spot. Buoy is at the left. A little bit after that, they find one of the crewmen's jackets. It's a leather bombardier jacket, Susie's. Susie from, he's one of the passengers. He's from Alaska. That's the only thing ever to be brought up from the plane, ever. And the reason why is it doesn't have anything to do with the bomber. It's Susie at the time was swimming away from the craft. So it has nothing to do with the bomber. It came off his body. They find their bodies 2 and 4 months later in various stages of decomposition. It wasn't very pretty, and they identified them though. There's records at the county morgue on this. So we have, here's what the events, here's how the events broke down here. We have starting off, number 1 is the crash right by the Homestead High level. See right over here. Number 2, the plane sank right up here, mile 5.13. Goes right around the bend. Alleman swims to shore. Alleman is the crew chief. He's aided by a truck driver, Devine, who jumps into the river. It's right across from there. 4, Jameson landed by the River Patrol. He's the co-pilot at the Hazelwoods Landing, right up there on the right-hand side. 5, the tugboat Charles Zubik lands Airman Smith. As you can see right here by the Amoco Tank Farm, which they just tore down. Unfortunately, I was going to use that in my film. Now I have to recreate it with computer-generated images. A tug, number 6, the tug Titan lands with Dodson, and the Expediter lands with 2 people. The Expediter was another tug involved in this. It was only mentioned once in the papers, and yet here you have 2 men on board. After that, you hear nothing more about the Expediter, and you hear nothing more about this extra man. It just disappears. The press totally just ignored this whole thing, the Expediter. But we have 2 men on there. One of them was the mystery man. Alleman is taken to St. Joseph's on the south side, number 7. We're getting further up the track here. 8, Devine is taken to the south side. Number 9, Airman Smith is taken to McGee Women's Hospital, and I have a guest here tonight who actually saw Airman Smith taken to the hospital. He was working at the hospital at the time. We have Dodson and Jameson. Number 10, taken. Is it the real Jameson or not? Taken to Montefiore. 11, Ingraham. One of the drowned victims' body, he's found on April 8th, 1956. And number 12, Susie's body is found. These are down here in Pittsburgh there on May 28th, 1956. And that's the immediate events right after the crash. That's how they play out. All right then, I'd like to go to the next video.
Tonight, first at 5, local news. Deadly crash. A car full of teens splits in half. Now a mother grieves the loss of her son.
I can't believe it's happened. I can't believe it happened.
Live coverage. Mother and son on trial after 3 Pittsburgh firefighters lose their lives. New details. Mystery on the Mon. What really happened the day the B-25 went down? Live, local, late-breaking news from Channel 11 News. Anchored by David Johnson, Peggy Finnegan, John Fedko on sports, and Dennis Bowman's Carnegie Science Center weather, plus Chopper 11. Now, Channel 11 News.
Age-old mystery on the Mon. A B-25 crashes into the Monongahela River in 1956, but no trace of the wreckage is ever found. Well, now that event is being reenacted. 41 years ago, an Air Force B-25 bomber plummeted into the Mon River. After that, no one knows if the rest of the story is fact or fiction because no one ever found the plane. But today, a film crew is trying to solve the mystery. Chopper 11 flew alongside as crews reenacted the last 17 minutes of the ill-fated journey, of course, minus the crash. The Homestead High-Level Bridge shut down around 4 o'clock. Hundreds of folks who live around that area came out to watch. Some still believe the mystery is because of a government cover-up. Others believe the plane was carrying some secret cargo. The plane was 53 feet long with a wingspan of 67 feet, so hard not to miss if someone did indeed recover it from the bottom of the Mon. Two Wings and a Prayer Films staged today's reenactment, and the company hopes to make a movie on the story called Mystery of the Mitchell Ghost Bomber.
Producer tries to simulate a hometown mystery, an ill-fated flight of a B-25 bomber. We'll show you that next.
It's become Pittsburgh folklore. What really happened to a B-25 bomber that crashed in the Mon River near Homestead 41 years ago today? Some have always suspected a government cover-up, What they suspect is that that plane was on a secret mission and secretly removed from the river.
Well, that's never been proven. The plane has never been found. So in an effort to find out what really happened and possibly make a movie about it, the last 17 minutes of that flight was simulated today near the Homestead High-Level Bridge. John Burnett talked to the man who hopes to someday reenact the mystery using a real B-25.
That's right, Jennifer. I certainly did, and actually we'll be hearing from Ray Duquesne, who is the producer, director, and the owner of Two Wings and a Prayer Film Company, which hopes to get a film paid for and produced later on this year that will outline that whole incident from start to finish. But what he was doing today, Ray and his compatriots and a couple of pilots were staging an event, if you will, sort of a dry run test to see what would be involved in recreating that historic flight. Now, we were there, and we can take you back about an hour and show you what was happening on the Homestead High-Level Bridge at about 4:20. That was approximately 10 minutes after the actual incident happened on this date back in 1956. The bridge was shut down temporarily. People were packing the bridge, waiting for the big moment. They didn't know, though, that a B-25 was not being used. It was more like a twin-engine Cessna. But again, this was only a dry run, and Ray had told me prior to the event that he would not be using a B-25 today. Later in the year, when he hopes to film this, the Confederate Air Force will supply him with one, and things obviously will be much more authentic. The FAA limited Ray to a floor of 500 feet today. That's as low as he could fly. And some people were impressed with the event and some weren't. Listen up.
Did I miss something? I mean, I brought the kids down here for a history lesson.
And what did you get?
I saw a plane going over, but nothing else. We didn't see much of anything. They said he was going to fly a lot lower than he did. He really didn't. Isn't that pretty cool? I liked it a lot.
Oh, you thought it was cool. You liked it?
Yeah.
Well, what did you like about it?
The plane, seeing the plane going over the bridge and stuff.
How about the fact that traffic was stopped on the Homestead High Level? That was pretty impressive.
That part.
That was pretty cool.
That's right. That makes history itself. If a plane flies over and they can stop traffic, I think that's great.
It was pretty great, and it was rather amazing when traffic was stopped from end to end of that bridge that you see behind me, and now, of course, it's backed up, completely packed with rush hour and traffic. A little bit later on, Ken and Jennifer, in fact, next hour, we'll be talking to Ray and find out more about his plans for this big production, the recreation of the flight, or the crash, rather, of the B-25 bomber. In addition, we'll have a little history for you, take you back about 13 years to a piece that I took part in for Evening Magazine. And boy, did I look younger then when we did this same story. This is one that keeps coming around, as you know full well.
This is an interesting idea, though. Thanks, John.
You bet.
Well, trying to solve a hometown mystery.
Coming up next, why experts are hoping for new clues from the disappearance of a B-25 bomber in one of the three rivers.
Our hometown's history, the story about a B-25 bomber that mysteriously disappeared 41 years ago today.
The bomber supposedly crashed into the Mon River near Homestead, but it has never been found. Well, today, the last 17 minutes of that flight was reenacted. John Burnett was there, and he is live now with the details. John?
Hey, Stacy, I am in one of my favorite places in all of Pittsburgh. This is Kyoto's Bar, Kyoto's Tavern here in Homestead, just on this end of the Homestead High-Level Bridge, the bridge that supposedly the B-25 crossed over and went right into the Mon River back in 1956, as you said, on this date 41 years ago. Now, earlier today, I had a chance to talk with a man who is hoping to become the producer-director of a new film about that episode. His name is Ray Duquesne, and I talked specifically with Ray about what he hoped to accomplish today. We are going to depend on the Air Force's version. We're going to fly the Air Force's summary of circumstances version and the old CAA transcripts. We're going to go up to Butler, and we're going to recreate the last 70 miles of this bomber, and we're going to fly at the speed that the Air Force says and at the exact points in which they passed. At 4:25 this afternoon, Ray got his chance to do just that in the twin-engine Cessna, not a B-25, and at 500 feet above ground level, not right down on the deck. 41 years ago, it happened a little differently. The B-25 first came to prominence during World War II in the famous air raids over Tokyo. After the war, it was used to deliver heavy payloads, and it was on one of those cargo missions that Pittsburgh's B-25 mystery began.
A B-25 bomber left Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, bound for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But something happened along the way. The Air Force said that the plane developed a fuel leak near Pittsburgh and had to be ditched in the Mon River. On January 31st, 1956, pilot Major Bill Dodson steered his B-25 bomber over the top of the Homestead high-level bridge and pointed the plane into the dark, murky waters of the Mon River. The time was 4:10 in the afternoon. The plane floated briefly on the surface of the river while the crew scrambled to escape from the sinking craft. However, not everyone made it. 2 men drowned. 5 minutes later, the huge bomber sank out of sight.
Of course, the Air Force officially still claims that that bomber is on the bottom of the Mon River or has broken into several pieces and separated and flowed downriver with the current. There are many people who believe that the bomber was brought up immediately after the crash, that there was a very important top secret payload on board, possibly an atomic bomb, possibly nerve gas. So the truth may never be known, but if Ray Duquesne has his way, he will find out and find his way to the bottom of the mystery, and it's a mystery that has been going on for 41 years. Now, the most famous mystery here in Homestead, and possibly all of the Mon Valley, is what you're looking at right here. This is, of course, Ray Kyoto's famous mystery sandwich, and with me right now, none other than Ray. And Ray, I don't have much time, but I just got to say, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Nice to see you, John.
And I said this is my favorite place in Pittsburgh because it's one of the first places I ever came when I got to Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
And this is your 50th year.
50th year this year, and I hope you never leave Pittsburgh.
God bless you, and I plan on staying as long as you do.
We love you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ray Kyoto. And now, let's head back to the studio. And I'm going to be out here for a while, guys. You're welcome to come join us after the newscast.
We might have to take in one of those mystery sandwiches.
Or two.
Or two. All right. Thanks, John.
In time to try to solve the mystery in the Mon, commemorating the crash of the B-25, coming up.
Channel 4 Action News at 6 is everywhere. Live with Sally Wiggins, Andy Nixon, Weather Watch with Chief Meteorologist Joe Donato, and Action Sports with Andrew Stocky. Action News continues.
It was 41 years ago today, a B-25 plane crashed and mysteriously disappeared in the Mon River. Tonight, a flyover memorial. Our Baron James is live at Homestead for the crash anniversary memorial. Baron, what was the purpose of the flight?
Well, Sally, I can tell you that, of course, some people believe that that plane was on a secret governmental mission and that when it went down, the government secretly removed it from the icy Mon, and others don't believe the story at all. Still, a film crew helped set up this reenactment today, a couple of hours ago, to help commemorate the last flight of the B-25, of course, without the crash. Flight time, 1609 hours and counting. Backward for this Aero Commander 680 reenactment plane. Back in time 41 years ago to 4:09 p.m., January 31st, 1956. Crash time, the mystery moment, the day an Air Force B-25 bomber plunged into an icy Monongahela River near the Homestead High-Level Bridge.
They ran into problems and they started Mayday and tried to get into the county airport and fell short and had to put water.
Former Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reporter Regis Babonis Sr. saw the survivors that ill-fated night, perched on parts of the plane. Reports at the time said there were 4 survivors, then 2 other people who didn't make it. But could there have been a 7th person on board? Maybe even Howard Hughes?
And the guys were standing on the wing of the plane.
How many guys were standing on
I would call between 4 and 7. And I remember hearing one that saying something like a rope. And then it went in underwater.
As if maybe say, throw me a rope.
Right.
Over the years since the crash, the stories of just what went wrong have become just as incredible, amazing, outrageous, even funny as just what the big B-25 had on board.
From alien bodies to an atomic bomb.
And I can tell you also that the official word, yes, that military plane did go down, and no, that B-25 has never been found or seen since 1956. In Homestead, live, I'm Baron James, back to you.
Adam Lynch tells me a lot about that B-25.
I'd love to hear the stories.
Yeah, thanks very much, Baron.
Okay.
More
Now, the Fox 53 10 o'clock news with John Huck and Carolyn Clifford continues.
All eyes are skyward as a vintage plane tries to trace the steps of a decades-old plane crash. It's right out of the X X-Files, a missing plane, and a possible military cover-up.
You got that right, Carolyn. It is a bizarre story, and it's one that's been a part of Pittsburgh lore for 41 years, ever since a B-25 crash landed into the Mon River. Many people feel the river still holds the secret to the plane's fate, so today, an independent filmmaker bankrolled a reenactment of the B-25's final moments. The flyover of a vintage 1957 Aero Commander could have answered a lot of questions into the mysterious crash of an Air Force B-25 41 years ago today. Instead, it's fueling speculation into what many believe is a military cover-up.
I think that the plane was carrying something that wasn't supposed to land here. When it did land here, efforts were taken to remove it from here as quickly and as quietly and efficiently as possible.
And Pittsburgh filmmaker Ray Duquesne is attracting attention in Hollywood with the mystery of the Mitchell ghost bomber. The military claims its crew radioed in with a fuel leak just north of New Alexandria. The military says it turned and followed this route to land at Greater Pittsburgh Airport. But did it? Ken Furstis flew that same route today in this Aero Commander, going at the same speed of the B-25. Furstis reached the crash area of the Mon River some 11 to 17 minutes sooner. So why couldn't the B-25 land safely?
I don't think the mystery's ever gone away. I think this has been a question people have asked in Pittsburgh for quite a few years.
Furstis was hired by Ray Duquesne, the independent filmmaker, and many others feel the plane inexplicably took this roundabout route. The theory is it was in distress, but the B-25 passed over Johnstown and Allegheny County airports.
It's a mystery, it's a thriller, and it's based on a true story.
Duquesne's theory is that the plane avoided those other airports because it was loaded with top-secret military hardware and had to make it to the military base at Greater Pitt. Whether the B-25 still lies at the bottom of the Mon is up for speculation. A river, much like the military, doesn't easily give up its secrets. Duquesne says 9 of the 10 planes that have crashed into the Mon have been recovered. The lone one unrecovered is the B-25. He hopes to release a docudrama on the mystery in the spring of '98.
All right. They say it was a twin-engine Cessna. It was a 1957 Aero Commander, and it was even louder inside the plane. Got me sick. I was deaf when I came out there. My voice was hoarse. The search started right near the Homestead High-Level Bridge, and it's like, why? Why did it have to? Why near the bridge when it went past the bridge and landed past it? Oh, what doesn't make any sense because the river flows that way. Whether the plane flowed backwards against the current or something, but they started searching. They did an extensive search there. Was it because the cargo dropped off? If there was cargo on board, maybe. It's one of the other things. We actually did prove there's the 17 minutes. Robert Johns calculated that. We took the ground speed times the air speed times the amount of distance covered. They should have got there 17 minutes sooner. They were meandering somewhere in the air. I can't tell exactly where they could be. There's been a lot of speculation. Some people say they did all kinds of craziness. We'll get into that later. There was a helicopter brought in for the search too. One other thing, a helicopter was brought in 2 days later, and it had, by many eyewitness accounts and in some journals, which Robert Gorman, an original researcher on this, found through a writing. They had a Geiger counter, and we're searching for this plane with a Geiger counter. Why? A Geiger counter. You think they'd use something that type of metal. Okay. Here we go. One of the first people was Johnny Evans. Johnny Evans, he's an interesting character. He got the plane for $10. He bought it with the salvage rights for $10 late in 1956. It was a steal of a lifetime. He was a barnstormer. He was a stunt pilot during the 1930s. He entertained people with barnstorming, and he was also just as adept on the waterways. He searched. He had 200 days in which to find that plane, and it was his. He didn't find it. He also spent every year of the rest of his life looking for that thing in the river. Never found it. Years later, when he and Robert Johns met at an OX5 club meeting, Robert Johns pointed out to him that the little salvage rights contract he had was not quite valid. The serial numbers were totally different from the actual plane that went in. So you could almost say that had he found the plane, he wouldn't have owned it. They could have still, it was technically that could have happened. And Johnny Evans wasn't quite happy with that little bamboozle on him that he thought that's what happened. But anyhow, there's Robert Johns on the inset. There's Johnny Evans. And going further, there's Robert H. Johns. A little bit about Robert H. Johns. He was born here in 1934 in Natrona Heights. He was a 1953 graduate of Harbrack High School. He was a Navy veteran of the Korean conflict, and he served as a flight crew chief on a bomber. He was also an engineer at Allegheny Ludlam Steel Corporation Research Division in Brackenridge before retiring in 1990. He invented 9 patents relating to steel processing and was the co-inventor of the strip casting process which Ludlam used. He had a commercial airplane pilot's license, and he authored a book, The Windmill Blinked, which I read you the poem earlier. And very interesting person. While he was stationed down in Kansas at a naval base is when he first heard of this bomber incident. He thought it was interesting and kind of just forgot about it and got on with his life. He thought it was an interesting Pittsburgh incident. He secretly suffered from dyslexia, but he overcame it. That's one of the things he did. He was often made fun of at work because he was the only guy there who didn't have a PhD. He had no college degree whatsoever, but he was a very smart guy. His IQ was over 150, well over 150. While he was down at the Kansas Naval Base, they experienced a UFO flap. They were harassed, and the pilots, everybody, was so severe, they brought down a Pentagon official, put everybody in this big auditorium, and this Pentagon high brass official gave them a big briefing on what to do and how to handle these UFOs. And since that time, Robert Johns really he believed in the phenomenon. He said he saw enough there. He talked to pilots, airline pilots who had run into the phenomenon. Later on, he was to run into Mr. Robert Gorman, who helped get him onto this project of the B-25. He built Allegheny Ludlam Research Facility's first computer in the 1970s. This guy was no dummy. His research to this day stands unparalleled in its depth, scope, and detail. Nobody before him, or not even afterwards, got as much information, as many interviews, and logging the hours, and the research, just pure research, and numbers. His material, American current researchers resource his material while at the same time ridiculously and simultaneously slamming him, but yet they use his materials, his research material. From 76 to 82, he was coached, assisted, and mentored by Mr. Bob Gorman. Previous investigations failed to find anything out of line in the way of concrete evidence, except for Bob Johns. In 1975, he went through a painful divorce and went into a tailspin. His friend Bob Gorman decided to give him the B-25 files to work on. It gave him something to focus on. Late that same night, John lay in bed, tormented by his problems, and he was listening to the radio. And he was listening to the Perry Marshall show on KDKA. This is in '76. It's about the second week of the month, January. He started listening to a caller who called into Perry Marshall's show late night on KDK. It was a man claiming to be a trucker. And Robert Johns listened for several minutes and suddenly sat bolt upright in bed and saw the mission in his life, because this trucker told Perry, "Yeah, you know that plane that went down the river 20-some years ago, well, they contracted me, the CIA, to take this darn thing out. They grabbed me and a bunch of truckers." Now you wonder why maybe the government didn't use its own truckers, but that's just, this is one of the main things this guy said, and it just sparked interest. Perry tried to keep the man on the show, and the man got very paranoid, saying, "I've said too much already, gotta go," and he left. So this is what got Bob really interested. He went back to Bob Gorman, and he says, "I'm gonna do it. I gotta do this thing," and he took it on from there. During his investigation, he claimed harassment, several different sorts, and actually some of his witnesses, as you're going to see in a little bit here, were harassed and threatened to. His garbage stolen from him, threats made against him over the phone. He and Bob Gorman both received threats of different kinds. Death, several attempts on their lives, which we get the detail on, and you can also see this in the movie. So when I get the movie made eventually, see that. Okay, the next slide here. Johns found out that there was a bunch of other planes that went into the river. A year before, in 1954, a DC-3 went in carrying GIs home for Christmas. And there was like 10 died, 18 survived. This was near Glassport. Now, a lot of people, though, tend to confuse these two. They'll say, I saw that B-25 taken out, and it was this and that. And if you ask them, what was the color of the plane and what time of day, they tell you it was during the daytime, and it was silver, it was this. So this is a good way to clear a lot of people when you have potential witnesses. And this is tragic, but it shows you here, they have the capability within a short period of time to take a plane out of the river. Here we have, this is January 16th, 1980 or 1981, where that Rockwell helicopter went in. Most people probably remember that too. Went in the Ohio. But once again, you see, they have the ability to take something out pretty quickly when they want to. Here we have another plane. This was killed too in Glassport. Lovely young woman there. And that happened in the 70s or 80s there. Got another one. During World War II, a crash near Monongahela. There was an Army pilot flying a small plane and crashed and lost his life. So you have a lot of planes here. Somebody told me there's a Cessna 172 still lost in the river. I have not found any documentation on that. As far as I know, it's just a B-25. But maybe we can talk about that during question and answers. Here's another picture of Robert Johns talking to the media about his findings and such as that. Here he shows up in the National Enquirer, talking about, that gives you a lot of oomph to your credibility. But they did carry it. He was the first national news, though, and that's before OJ made the big news. Here we have John's talking about nerve gas being on board. This is one of his witnesses said there was nerve gas on board. Okay, just a little quick bit about, there was a fellow named Bob Gorman. I talked a little bit, just want to say a little more. He was the man in the background. You'll see a lot of Robert Johns. You won't see too much of Bob Gorman. He was a real solid, deep cover fella. He did a lot of good research. He did the research before Bob Johns. They got him on, and like I said, kind of greased the wheels with a lot of the media. Before there was Agent Fox Mulder of the X-Files, before there was Kolchak the Night Stalker, before the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there was Bob Gorman. He was president and founder of the Omegas Commission. It's a paranormal investigative unit of the early 1970s. He hosted his own cable access television show. This is where Bob Johns first noticed him, watching TV one night and saw his show. They got to be friends. He was well known in the local and national media, guested on many people's TV and radio shows, including Perry Marshall's. He wrote for Fate magazine and other national and international media, guested on many, like I said, TV and radio shows. He and Robert Johns were close friends and associates. They were the Bob brothers. When they got together, sparks flew. Electricity was in the air. They came up with ideas and new ways to research things, Bob and Bob. They both investigated many paranormal phenomenon, and Mr. Gorman dropped out of sight in 1982. And we can take up the trail maybe sometime later, but that's where we'll end that for right now. Okay, Bob Johns started something called Operation Dragon's Tooth. This was to go into the river and find some evidence of the bomber being there. Now, we have evidence that there was several grappling hooks used that were torn off, supposedly taking this bomber out of the river. Well, let's find those, see exactly where that spot happened. Maybe we can track things back. Maybe there was an escape hatch blown when the guys were escaping from the plane, when the water started pouring in. Maybe we can find that. Maybe there's at least that. And so they started it. Operation Dragon Tooth, of course, was not successful. It didn't find those things. Next video, please.
Services during the Second World War and won acclaim for the important role it played in the Pacific. Now, airplane crashes are not that rare, but when one crash lands and sinks and then disappears in one of our rivers, well, that's how legends are made. What happened to that plane? Who was on it? How could it disappear? Or did it? Tonight, we'll take a look at one of Pittsburgh's favorite mysteries in our story about the wanted B-25.
This is 1978.
1956, when a Billy Mitchell B-25 Air Force plane crashed into the Monongahela River. A lot of people saw that. Hundreds of rush hour motorists were on the Homestead High-Level Bridge at the time. It floated about 1.5 miles downstream before sinking, never to be seen again. At least that's the way the story has gone until now. Well, that plane was 53 feet long, the length of a streetcar. Its wingspan was 67 feet in length, and from the low point of its belly to the tip of its tail, it was well over 11 feet in height. In fact, it was exactly like this one. Now, how in the world could a plane that size get lost in a river that was only 15 feet deep? According to unpublished Air Force reports, after 2 days of dragging, something was pulled to the surface. It slipped and sank back into the water, but not before the Air Force identified it as a wing of the plane. It was snagged and lost twice more that day. Finally, a buoy was placed in the water marking the plane, and the search was postponed for 2 days. What happened to the plane during that 2-day period? Some say it was secretly removed. However, on February 4th, the Army Corps of Engineers was brought in to continue the search. They never found the plane.
We went in on the scene, and we had what we call a large derrick boat. We had a tugboat, another barge, and we discussed where the plane went out of sight as a man on the bank at the railroad station in the train yard had told us he had saw the plane go underwater. We used what we call a clamshell bucket under the derrick boat, and you would spud down and you sweep the bottom of the river. And we started on one side of the bank and sweep all the way across. Then move down another 50 feet, sweep back, and we just work back and forth across the river, sweep at the bottom of the river to try to locate the plane. And we went clear all the way down to the first navigation structure, which is 7 miles down the high river at Emsworth.
That strikes me as a fairly complete and thorough search.
Right.
Is that how you feel about it?
A very thorough search. Then we moved back out another 50 feet and then made several passes up and down in between these locations.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Combs? Do you think that plane is still in the river?
Well, my honest opinion is I don't think it is. I think the plane was removed, but the how, when, or where, I don't know.
Colonel William McQuaid of the U.S. Air Force. Do you believe the plane is still in the river?
Certainly do. It has to be.
Some reports have suggested the plane was removed from the water, cut into pieces, and trucked to the Oakdale Nike site. That's one point of controversy. There are others. The plane originally took off from Nellis Air Force Base just outside of Las Vegas on January 30th, the day before the crash. It flew directly to Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, where it remained overnight. The next morning, it headed for Selfridge Air Force Base near Detroit. Then, without refueling, it took off for Olmsted Air Force Base, located on the outskirts of Harrisburg. Just past Pittsburgh, a fuel problem was reported and the plane turned around, intending to land at Greater Pitt. It never made it. Bob Johns is a commercial pilot and a research technologist from Natrona Heights. During the last 3 years, he has invested a great deal of energy examining the details of the missing B-25. How would you succinctly summarize your feelings at this point about the Air Force story, about the pilot story? What are your thoughts about the Air Force story at this point?
Well, I think it's primarily a cover-up on something that occurred highly out of line from what we were told happened.
Let's trace the course. Okay, now the blue line indicates the Air Force story and course, and the red line indicates what we could call your version of it, right?
Well, it's my version based on the actual transcript of the actual radio communication between that aircraft and Greater Pitt Tower.
Why the discrepancy, do you suppose?
The discrepancy is there to hide a few key facts, I would think.
Such as what?
Well, such as the aircraft did not run out of fuel due to an abnormal loss, implying a great leak, approximately 4 times greater than normal consumption. It covers that they actually flew further along that route than what they tell us.
That further further along Johns is referring to is actually 17 minutes of unreported flight time. Where was it during those 17 minutes? Do you know?
No, I
It
don't.
obviously was not at New Alexandria.
I can't answer that question because I don't know. The official record is, as you say, exactly that, and that is a question.
It also covers the fact that the only conceivable way that plane could have run out of fuel, which is what it apparently did, was if you factor in an additional load aboard that aircraft.
How much of a load?
About 3,000 pounds.
So you're saying the Air Force is hiding the fact that the plane was carrying 3,000 extra pounds?
I'd say that that's the most logical explanation for all of the cover-up that I've uncovered so far.
What 3,000 pounds? What would it have been?
I have no idea what it could have been. All I know is that they went to great lengths to make sure the people of Pittsburgh didn't know that that 3,000 pounds was in the river.
Yeah, the bottom line on all this, though, is this is all your opinion, right?
No, this is based on hard documented evidence. This is based on flight plans filled out by the pilots. This is based on transcripts of radio communications. And all the calculations come directly out of the pilot's flight manual. So if it's opinion, it's I would call informed opinion.
This is Ron Lennard. He was Chief of Public Affairs for the Pittsburgh District Army Corps of Engineers. We were supposed to interview him for this story, but he canceled at the last minute. The reason he gave was that he'd received a phone call from Washington, D.C. advising him to keep his mouth shut in connection with the missing B-25. And if he didn't, the caller promised to hand Lennard cigarettes through the prison bars. Now, we don't know who that caller was or who he was affiliated with. We do have some guesses, but all we really know is that Lennard was frightened enough to cancel the interview. Lennard also gave us permission to say what he thinks was aboard that plane. He says he thinks it was carrying something very dangerous, from Nevada, where atomic testing was being done, or from Oklahoma, where germ warfare weapons were being tested. Whatever was aboard the plane could have been dangerous enough to be kept a secret, and dangerous enough to cause a citywide panic upon crash. One bit of evidence that tends to support the theory that radioactive materials were on board is that a Geiger counter was used in the search. Isaac Dominic was working on the river the week of the crash and says he saw a military helicopter searching for the plane.
There was a fellow on the boat that was talking to one of the guys off the helicopter, and he said there was a Geiger counter on there, and if there was any possible chance that plane being there, they would have detected on account of uranium on the dials.
No way. There's no way a Geiger counter could pick up the radioactivity in those gauges. Dr. Mark Blauer of the University of Pittsburgh.
If a Geiger counter was being used to locate radioactive material through the skin of an airplane through 15 feet of water, then the only chance that I can see, feasible chance of locating it, would be if the material was in such large quantity as to overcome the thickness of the plane and the thickness of the water.
So they must have been looking for something else besides the plane. Do you have any idea what the plane was carrying, Colonel?
To my knowledge, it was strictly an empty airplane going to, the then Olmsted Air Force Base at Harrisburg to pick up parts to take back to Nellis. And other than the passengers, to my knowledge, it was empty.
Was not carrying anything dangerous?
Not to my knowledge, no.
The flight, the crash, the cargo, and the plane's disappearance aren't the only mysteries in this story. There's a big question surrounding the survivors. Of the 6 crew members reportedly aboard, 2 drowned. Their bodies were later recovered. That left 4 survivors. But there is evidence to suggest an unidentified 5th person was aboard. Of the 4 reported survivors, one was Sergeant Al Oliver, who swam to shore and was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital on the south side. A second, Airman Charles Smith, was rescued by a towboat near the Amoco tank farm and taken to McGee Hospital in Oakland. A third, Major William Dodson, the pilot, was rescued by Isaac Dominic.
But I did get Dodson out, took him down to the landing, and from there, he must have went with the ambulance or the police, Pittsburgh Crazy Police, took him on up to the Montefiore Hospital.
According to the papers, Captain John Jameson, the fourth survivor, was taken to Montefiore Hospital with Major Dutton. But in a radio talk show interview, Jameson insisted that he was rescued by the police and taken to another hospital, where he remained alone for 3 days. But someone, not Jameson, was with Dotson at Montefiore. Whoever that fifth person was, great pains were taken to protect his identity. Lillian O'Donnell was on duty at Montefiore that night.
How much effort did they go to not be photographed or seen?
They asked me to cover their faces with towels.
Really?
Yes. Which I did. And when I went with them to the room they were going to be admitted in, they had their faces covered.
Were there any photographs allowed?
No. They wanted to very badly.
Somebody wanted to take pictures?
Yes. Everybody, there are photographers all over the place. And, as I say, everybody got mad at me because I was told not to. I talked to the officer of the day at Las Vegas, and I had strict instructions from him and also from Oakdale not to give out information. In fact, they did not even know the names of the people that we had there.
The press.
It's been 23 years since that plane went down. Its legacy is an altered flight plan, an unidentified fifth survivor, a mysterious 3,000-pound cargo, and the plane's complete disappearance. If anyone knows the solution to this mystery, it's the United States Air Force. We don't need the Bermuda Triangle for our mystery. We've got one of our own right here in Pittsburgh's Golden Triangle.
All right, the Golden Triangle is now the Golden Bermuda Triangle. That Lillian O'Donnell who you saw was first got on board by calling up the Perry Marshall show, and then Robert Johns was able to talk to her. Like I said, there's all these photographers, all these news people, and yet there's almost nothing left on this. All the records, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Press, Sun Telegraph, their records were empty when Bob Johns went to them. The police files were purged. When they tried to find out if the bomber had been taken down the river in a barge in a covert recovery effort, you find out that all the records for that year, 56, are gone. They just somehow purged them. They chose 56 to purge. Just coincidence. Must be some kind of standing operating procedure, right? Anyhow, so that's what's going on there. There's something that keeps coming up here, and that's Mr. Perry Marshall and the Perry Marshall Show. I don't know if you know, I grew up here listening to the radio shows, the Marshall's office, and the Marshall was always in town every night, and it was a great show, and you had everybody going, yeah, that's where these kind of things happen. You had anybody calling in, and Mr. Marshall leading them down that dusty western trail of facts and fictions. And I'd like to let you know that we do have here Mr. Perry Marshall, formerly of KDKA, and I'm going to invite him up here to speak for a couple minutes. Can we give him a hand? Being here, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Ray. Hi, everybody. To some of you who are younger, this is history. To those of us who are older, it's memory. And I know I see a few guys in the audience who, like me, are fondly known as old farts. And I will never forget doing my radio show. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it was on KDKA radio. And for the younger, it said AN. I know you don't know it exists, but for 14 years on that particular show, from midnight until dawn. Anyway, I got this call from a truck driver who had called me before. I recognized his voice, and he seemed to be straight. 20 years after the B-25 crashed in the Mon River. And he said, I've been holding this back for 20 years. I gotta tell the story. So he started to tell me that he and a couple of other truck drivers in the middle of the night that plane crashed, told to get their rigs down to the Mon, where they had flatbeds waiting. The plane was taken out of the river in 3 parts and driven to Oakdale, the Pittsburgh, I believe, their first Nike missile site. And that was the most secure place that the Air Force could find to hide the remnants of that B-25. All denied. As Ray mentioned, Bob Johns happened to be listening to my program that night. And he thought, oh. So he started to delve into the files, whatever he could find, the newspapers, contacted the Air Force, contacted whomever he could find in federal government. And he got a lot of information, but no satisfaction. And with him, as an investigator, was Bob Gorman, who's sitting here tonight. And Bob Gorman didn't get the kind of publicity Bob Johns got. I don't know, maybe Bob didn't want the publicity, but he was on my radio program with Bob Johns. And that's when we started the true investigation on the air, talking with the captain of the plane and what do they call him, the cargo officer? The what? The crew chief. Accounting for 6 people, 4 survivors, 2 dead. But the real mystery came when a very nervous sounding woman called that night. And she said, my husband is too nervous and too frightened to call you, but I have to do it. She claimed that her husband was a diver who went down into the fuselage of that B-25. It was night, it was very murky, a flashlight didn't do too much good, but she claims, her husband claimed, that there was another body in that airplane. And from what he was able to feel, it felt like possibly a military uniform. So the mystery of the 7th man still continues. And really, I've been intrigued by this story. I was working for WEDO in McKeesport at the time of the crash. We were a daytime radio station. We signed off at 5 o'clock. Well, the plane went in about 4:15, and I could get almost no information, and if I could get information, I didn't have time to put it on the air, and that's one of the most frustrating things a radio announcer can face in his lifetime, having information, not able to air it. But the next day, of course, it was all over the place. And that's really all I have to offer here. The memory is very strong of the day of the crash and 20 years later. And God, I wish Ray Duquesne all the luck in the world in putting together this film. Ray, thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much, Barry. Okay then, let's march on just 1 second more here. Add a little weight and you crashed in Pittsburgh. Was it the pilot's eating? Was it the diet program of the Air Force at the time? No, it was something they may have picked up at another base. At first, the Air Force and Dodson and others didn't admit to exactly where they were going. There's this confusion. Where were they heading? Were they heading to this place or that place? It first came out Washington, D.C. The first press reports came out saying the Air Force saying Washington, D.C., Dodson saying Washington, D.C. Then you have 2 days later when Dodson gives his official press speech there, he's talking about Olmsted Air Force Base in Harrisburg. That's our last place. And we're doing this whole long cross-country flight from Area 51 to pick up a couple little parts, and it's an administrative flight. And, well, sometimes pilots did need to get extra flying time and rank and pay and all this stuff and just experience. So, I mean, it's possible. You had a lot of confusion going on, but they made some stops they didn't quite admit to until we got to the Perry Marshall show. And I actually have, just real quickly here, it's a historic tape. It's actually from the Perry Marshall show from '76, and it's with Colonel, at that time he's Colonel John Jameson. He was Captain Jameson, the co-pilot of the plane. 1 second.
transport by yourself, or were you taking an ambulance along with Donald Dawson?
No, I was taken by myself. I was completely separated from all the other members on the airplane.
You were ever warned by anybody not to say anything about this particular ditching?
Absolutely not. If that were the case, I would become free now.
Well, that was a long time ago. You're retired now, aren't you?
Yeah, but they still have control of me.
Do they really?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, I'm a retired regular officer, and I still belong to the Air Force.
In other words, if
They can agree on the internet.
okay, in other words, if they were in your service, active service, you had been sworn to secrecy about one particular item, you couldn't admit anything about it today.
That is right.
I see. Okay. We have, to your knowledge, do you know if there was any of the passengers, including among any of the passengers aboard, someone who could be considered a courier?
No.
Okay, not to my knowledge.
Okay, so that's Perry Marshall interviewing Colonel John Jameson, and Bob Johns was also in there talking to him, and he heard what this man said. They asked him, you know, you're retired, you're saying all these things and nothing ever happened, there's nothing out of line with anything that happened. No, it's just an ordinary plane on an ordinary mission, it had an ordinary crash. And he said, yeah. He said, well, are you under orders not to say anything? No. Well, he says, well, actually, I'm still owned by the Air Force. They said, what do you mean by that? I'm just saying if you didn't hear it, it's kind of a little murky there, it's old tape. And basically he's saying, yeah, hey, when you're an officer and you get to a certain rank, you get out, you have to sign secrecy things. And Bob John says, so that means, you know, if you were told not to say something about something, you wouldn't. He says, yeah. So basically what he's saying is I could sit there on this show, he just admitted he could sit there on that show with Perry and Bob for a couple hours and say anything, and it could be a lie. And he just admitted to that. That's very key to this, if you want to believe the conspiracy side of things. But I'm going to show a little bit of something else, the other side, the non-conspiracy side, in a short bit. I'd just like to introduce a man who went into retirement, disappeared back in 1982. And as we talked about before, his name was Bob Gorman, and I want to let you know he's coming back out of retirement, and he's back in from the cold. And here he is, Mr. Bob Gorman.
A long time ago since I've been in this place doing anything regarding the paranormal. Bob was a very good friend. He was going through a very bad time with a divorce. When he came to me with this cockamamie tale, he overheard a trucker claiming that the CIA had contacted him and spirited away B-25 aircraft. At that point in time, Bob was my aviation consultant. Anytime we had a UFO report that might have turned out to be an aircraft, or an aircraft was involved in any way, shape, or form, Bob was the man without the PhD, but that had the knowledge. He could pull things together and get the facts. You know, March of 1994, we're not talking National Enquirer here, we're talking Popular Science. They did an article called Searching for the Secrets of Groom Lake by Stuart Brown. This was about Area 51. This is not part of the official program of the U.S. government. I think this is some type of intelligence operation where there could be foreign money involved. It's expensive, and it's an immunity oversight process. This defrauds the American government and people. You go to jail for that. So stated an anonymous congressional source with the highest level of security clearance who had visited Groom Lake several times and who at that time believed there was a mysterious technology development underway at the location known as Groom Lake or Area 51. You know, also, in the last year or so, the U.S. Army has admitted to wide-scale spraying of American farms and cities with toxic chemicals and fungal agents during the 50s and 60s. These were conducted by the Biological Warfare Center, based at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Sites included Minnesota, Missouri, North Central Texas, Cape Kennedy, Florida, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Northeast Oklahoma, and Nevada. Welcome aboard, a fresh CIA recruit was told his first day of the job in 1950. We're not in the intelligence business in this office. We are an executive action arm of the White House that is trying to counter the Soviet bloc by using the same methods that they do. Again, not from Weekly World News, This is from the U.S. News and World Report, January 10th, 1994. The methods that the CIA, the DOD, the AEC, and the rest of the alphabet soup were using were radiation, drugs, hypnosis, electroshock, lobotomy. They were using them on mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, unsuspecting bar patrons, desperate parents, and the terminally ill. Recently, apology as policy came to light as the president himself apologized for radiation experiments on unsuspecting Americans. So yeah, I'm a little bit of a conspiracy buff. I've been in the game long enough to know that in 1982, when my daughter was very young, and I love my family very much, maybe I should just walk away. Because not only were things happening as far as death threats, but I learned that some of the true believers out there are more scary than the government. 1994 was a banner year. I received this letter from the Central Intelligence Agency, and it said, "Dear Mr. Gorman, this is to acknowledge receipt of your 18th of March 94 Freedom of Information Act request for all records regarding CIA involvement with the security and removal of Air Force 44 29-125 from the Monongahela River and its subsequent transfer to Oakdale Night Site during the first week of February '56. For identification purposes, we have assigned your request the number referenced above." And I continue. The CIA may neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of records responsive to your request. Such information, unless of course it has been officially acknowledged, would be classified for reasons of national security under Executive Order 12356. Therefore, the request is denied under exemptions B1 and B3, and then they include a description of what these are. It's strange the CIA also used this exact same letter that they refused to confirm nor deny the existence of Area 51, an area that now most of America realizes exists. It was featured on the motion picture Independence Day, and it's been recorded in numerous Soviet satellite reconnaissance photos. I don't know what more I can add here. People have been gently pulling me out of retirement these last few months. And you know, with the X-Files and everything else, the truth is indeed out there. I don't know if the truth is what we thought it would be. I keep telling myself and my family every time I see a program on UFOs or a program on any paranormal experiments that I don't think what's going on is what's going on. I think there is a good deal more that we don't know about. It's been conducted by this and other governments, and I think we'd have to take a deep breath. I don't mean by watching the internet and some of the stuff floating around there, but a fresh look, and that's why I was very careful not to color Mr. Duquesne's early research attempts. I have here the summary and circumstances in the official Air Force, that they sent me free of charge, by the way, very accommodating our government when they have to be, report of what actually happened to Air Force 44-29125. And in here is a chronology, a day-by-day chronology of when the search occurred, who conducted the search, how many hours it took place. And then you take the report from the Army Corps of Engineers and from their official logbooks that record when they got involved, when the Air Force contacted them, what they did, what took place. The two aren't even close. I mean, the two aren't even close. You have eyewitness accounts, and you have documents of an H-21 helicopter dragging radiation detection gear that they claimed, if you saw in the video, they were going to try to detect the radium instruments on the dial, which was impossible. Oh, the H-21 is mentioned in this report, that it was merely 1 or 2 low passes. No mention was made of radiation detection gear. To get that story, you have to go to the Army Corps of Engineers records. So I wish this young man all the luck in the world. I've been told that Arnold Schwarzenegger will be playing my part in the movie. He's going to have to bone up a little bit, but so I thank you very much. It's been a while since I've been here. Maybe I'll get back. Right now I'm doing an article for Fate magazine called 30 Seconds Over Pittsburgh. maybe we will find out what actually happened that fateful day in 1956. I know that there's probably a few heads in Washington right now real pleased as punch that I'm back in the UFO business. We thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Fascinating. Right. Okay. This is the flight plan. Nellis Air Force Space way up on the left there. Like I said, you probably saw it on Independence Day, Area 51. Stop B, Winslow. Stop C, Albuquerque. They fly on past Amarillo, Oklahoma City. They stop at Tinker Air Force Base. That doesn't come out immediately. It comes out later, years later, in Bob Johns and Bob Gordon's investigation. And you have all kinds of funny stuff going on at several of these stops. They could have picked up things. They didn't. Maybe they didn't have to, but it was available there to be picked up if it was picked up. But then again, they may not pick up anything. At Tinker, you have all kinds of biological and germ warfare stuff going on, and of course, you like at Area 51 there, just the legitimate stuff. You have the Manhattan Project. You have the U-2 spy plane, the stealth bomber, Star Wars, and a lot of other stuff. SR-117 plane. It's 1,035 miles. Now, this is what Bob John said. He said, you guys flew nonstop and you were in a B-25. There wasn't enough gas. Where'd you guys finally stop? It's on Perry Show. You go, oh, we stopped off at Tinker. Oh, why didn't you guys say it years ago when the press was asking you? You're retired now. So they go on Oklahoma City. We know about that place now. Tulsa, St. Louis, Indianapolis, fly overboard. They stay overnight at Selfridge Air Force Base. Don't refuel. You're flying all the way across country. Your last stop was Tinker. And there's various things. They were lazy. Oh, they thought this and that and what every other thing. But the thing is, they did not refuel. They thought they had 3 hours left, which is enough to make it from Selfridge to Olmsted to make your next stop. However, was there extra added weight on board? Did that eat up more of the fuel? Who knows? We'll find out in the movie. There you go from Selfridge Air Force Base. This is the last leg of it. They're trying to make it to Harrisburg. Of course, they don't. There's A is greater Pittsburgh. The red is County Airport, New Alexandria, Beacon. This is fuel consumption at normal gross. Bob Johns did his research here. He got the Air Force manuals on these things. Basic aircraft weight is 18,000 pounds empty, and it goes on 75 gallons oil, 7-man cruise, 1,400 pounds, 974 gallons fuel. It goes on Tinker to Selfridge, actual flight time, 3 hours and 37 minutes. You can go right down this chart there, and it's all spelled out for you. 155 average cruise consumption, 155 gallons cruise time, and you do the mathematics. Cruise fuel, total consumptions, everything. And Johns just came up and he said, this just doesn't work out mathematically. There's some kind of, unless you're in the twilight zone, then anything can happen, of course, if you get into this area. Flying time to 330 gallons at new gross, 22,611 if you add all that up on top. Takeoff and climb. You have to take off. Johns thought that Dodson in their rush didn't calculate in takeoff. Takeoff takes up a lot of fuel to get there. And I found out when I flew up in that 1957 Air Commander. Average cruise consumption, approximate flying time, you're going 250 miles per hour, which is the cruising speed. And you get down total flying time, blah, blah, blah. Then you go on to, with a higher gross, what if you have some, say, 3,500 pounds extra on board? And you add it all up, and you come down to the bottom, and Robert Johns says, wow, that fits. That's exactly, if you get that, then you end up dead right at Pittsburgh. You run out of fuel totally right at Pittsburgh. So it wasn't just like him just waking up with a nightmare when, oh, I've got the vision from God, this is how I, no, he did the mathematics. The little link that wasn't there. This time I'd like to throw another video. Oh, I'd like to say one more thing here. In a little bit here, I'll be taking questions and answers, so please stick by. I know people want to question somebody else. And Mr. Marshall, if he's still here. Brought to you by Area 51. You figure out the communication.
Sank here in the Monongahela River. According to the Air Force, the plane was never recovered, but eyewitnesses say the plane was quietly removed in the middle of the night. Tonight on Evening Magazine, Pittsburgh's B-25 bomber mystery.
They were sitting here about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they heard the unmistakable sound of a plane close by in trouble.
It's an event that the folks here at Kyoto's, as well as most of the people around Pittsburgh, have been talking about ever since. I'm talking about the mystery of the B-25 bomber that went down in the Mon, just a stone's throw from Joe's back door, right here at the end of the Homestead High-Level Bridge. Tonight on Evening Magazine, we're going to take a look at the events that we think occurred on that day back in January of 1956, as well as some of the conflicting theories surrounding them.
Pittsburgh has a mystery hidden under the night's dark disguise. It's a mystery about a B-25 bomber that disappeared into the Monongahela River exactly 28 years ago. Today, some people say that there is new evidence surfacing to suggest that the B-25 was quietly removed late at night by the Air Force. Evidence that the plane might have been carrying secret weapons, and evidence that there were many cover-ups to hide the truth. The mystery is so well known, it's become a legend in Pittsburgh. And for one man, it's become an obsession.
The question is, why all this extreme cloak and dagger type security on a routine air crash? Well, when you study the details about it, you find out it's not nearly as routine as they'd like to have you believe.
Bob Johns is trying to unravel the mystery behind Pittsburgh's missing B-25. Bob has spent 8 years digging through government documents and talking to eyewitnesses. He's putting the facts as he sees them into a book that is more intriguing than most any science fiction novel. The B-25 first came to prominence during World War II in the famous air raids over Tokyo. After the war, it was used to deliver heavy payloads, and it was on one of those cargo missions that Pittsburgh's B-25 mystery began. A B-25 bomber left Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, bound for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But something happened along the way. The Air Force said that the plane developed a fuel leak near Pittsburgh and had to be ditched in the Mon River.
This is the Homestead High-Level Bridge. On January 31st, 1956, pilot Major Bill Dotson steered his B-25 bomber over the top of this bridge and pointed the plane into the dark, murky waters of the Monongahela River. The time was 4:10 in the afternoon.
The plane floated on the surface of the river while the crew scrambled to escape from the sinking craft. Not everyone made it. 2 men drowned. 5 minutes later, the huge bomber sank out of sight. John Reed wasn't working for the Army Corps of Engineers then, but he says their efforts to thoroughly search the river never produced a thing.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility that the plane is still there, but the people who are out looking for it to know the best as to what you could expect out of that river think that it must have been pulled out.
The Air Force maintains, even to this day, that the plane is still down there. Meanwhile, the rumors about the mysterious plane continue coming to the surface. Bob Johns heard them discussed on KDKA Radio's late-night talk show. Bob is a pilot himself, and his experience as a crew chief on board a Navy bomber sparked his interest in the missing plane. The alleged facts didn't make sense to him, so he started his own investigation. Bob was able to draw up an interesting scenario after examining Air Force documents and talking to eyewitnesses.
That scenario implies that the aircraft was carrying some extra weight. That weight led to the extra fuel consumption. That fuel consumption brought about the crash.
What was that plane's heavy payload? In addition, Bob discovered many other unanswered questions. Discrepancies in records of the pilot's radio conversations with the tower. The fact that the plane was headed for the wrong airport when it tried to make an emergency landing. Differences in the number of people who were actually on board. Survivors who refused to have their pictures taken at the hospitals, and threats on eyewitnesses' lives.
The B-25 bomber was a big plane for its day. This one at Forest Lawn Garden Cemetery measures 53 feet in length and 67 feet from wingtip to wingtip. So the question is, how could a plane this large be lost forever in only 19 feet of water?
This B-25 wasn't the first plane to plummet into the rivers around Pittsburgh. Bob found out that 9 other planes have also gone in, but all of them have been recovered, all except the B-25. Ironically, another B-25, lost for nearly 40 years in a South Carolina lake, was recovered this summer in 40 feet of water. One man who knows Pittsburgh's rivers like the back of his hand is Captain Jack Gessling. He pilots the cruise boats for the Gateway Clipper fleet.
With the many boats traveling up and down here, somebody somewhere would have to have hit it, seen it, or something. I just can't see where it could be here in the river.
Perhaps the key eyewitness to the whole mystery is this man. Clyde Barnes is a former railroad engineer who was working the night of the crash right next to the spot where the plane supposedly sank. Clyde says he saw men with wetsuits jump out of a huge boat and into the river.
They wasn't down there very long. Up come the wing. Half of them one side of the wing, on the barge. Wasn't very long, the other side come up. Next, the fuselage come up, went on the barge. They wasn't there more than maybe an hour, 10 hours, 15 minutes.
When you talk to some eyewitnesses that indicate that the aircraft was taken out the night of the crash, it had to be something else they were looking for, most likely something that was lost from the aircraft.
Bob theorizes that the Air Force was scrambling to recover secret weapons, either an atomic bomb or nerve gas. It was this extra payload that weighed down the plane, burned up extra fuel, and caused the crash in the first place.
The only thing that's going to get this story out, if it's ever really answered, is if the people of Pittsburgh raise enough fuss to be demand, to be told what happened, or almost happened in their city.
Bob Johns is still piecing together all of the facts surrounding Pittsburgh's missing B-25 bomber, and he hopes to have all of those facts in his new book, scheduled to be published later this year. An evening magazine...
Just a quick thing here. Now, we're going to go to another side here. It's possible that bomber's still there. That's the thing, though. That's the immediate assumption. It's there. Prove to me it isn't there. But I'm going to do these things and say, well, maybe it's still there. Okay, how's that? I'm going to roll something for you just another second here. About another B-25. It's a story of B-25 down in North Carolina. Can we roll the video? There are those searching right now for the bomber in the river who hope that this story can be replayed here in Pittsburgh. I put these intentional gaps between it. It's almost like the gaps in our knowledge on this thing.
And then knew exactly where it was. The bomber ended up right in their own backyard.
There were some women laying out children, sunbathing, and
noticeably absent from that great event was the pilot of the bomber.
So,
of course, even if he is still alive and had been able to come, you can't say his wife was staying away.
I mean, that's...
You stay with us, because next up, Liz and I will be joining some special friends and some of their special contribution to Children's Hospital.
Now, you're 40 years later, there's almost as much commotion as the day it went down. That B-25 is being raised out of the lake by a U.S. Naval Reserve unit from Virginia. But before it could be raised, it had to be found. Roy Still has been trying to find the Air Force bomber for 20 years. He wants it to be a World War II memorial for the people of South Carolina.
I knew it was there, and I knew when they brought it on up under the bars, but you know, seeing it, it gave you a little butterfly in it when you got it.
But the B-25 remained in its watery grave until Roy found some help. That help arrived in the form of the Navy Reserve.
It's going to be a little bit touchy, a little bit delicate, and I don't know if anything's been done like this before, but we're going to try it.
With most of the work going on underwater, Roy can only wait and hope that soon he'll be able to see what has eluded him for so many years.
It's a real day for me. It's just a dream, a long, long dream. It's come true.
off the bottom and in remarkably good condition, everyone should give a sigh of relief. But the drama and the problems are just beginning. Transferring it from the water to dry ground proved to be a major task. Obstacles such as the volatile 40-year-old fuel has to be removed. A 75-ton crane to lift the bomber has to maneuver around high-voltage power lines. The mud that's collected in the plane has to be washed out to make the aircraft as light as possible. After that, the initial lift. Refused to come out of the water. The lifting rig used 6-inch steel I-beams, but these started to bend under the weight of the over 20,000-pound aircraft. After lots of discussion and redesigning of the overhead rigging, another day of anticipation passed before the lift would try it again.
Okay, we're going to come up with it. Ready? Okay, coming out.
And the larger steel I-beam worked, and the B-25 finally left its watery home. With care normally reserved for something that's new, the aircraft is reborn into the air, gently moved to solid ground before being transported to the airport. The boy still is unquestionably relieved.
This was a big day for me. And it is a long dream that finally came true today.
What was once a majestic flying machine that turned into a lost image on the bottom of a lake has now fulfilled a dream and has returned as a piece of history.
We have a plan. Anybody finds this thing and it looks like that, we're going to refurbish it and make a bar out of it. We'll have a get bombed on the bomber party, and you're all invited. That's if we find it. That's what it takes to find it. It's that easy, right? Or isn't it? That's a lake. The Vaughn's a river. But they found it and pulled that out of there, and they knew where it was at. There's still questions about ours. Nobody's done that yet. There's those, though, who do hope they can do that same thing here, and let's see if they do. Okay, fuel system here. B-25, they asked the pilots, did it have a fuel dumping? Could it have dumped its fuel? And you look here, Bob John's got the schematics for the fuel system. And to lose fuel, which is what the Air Force first said, the story's changed. First it was leaking fuel, then it just ran out of fuel, and then there was carburetor ice. The story's changed several times by different people involved as the Air Force and the pilots over the years. What's the real story? It should be one thing. What was it? You were there. You were flying the thing. Was it carb ice, or was it loss of fuel, or was it no fuel? The story keeps changing. But here's the whole system. Is it okay? Here's Dodson's version. This is where they flew. They flew down to about Butler, turned around, came down, and then headed south, and didn't make it to county, went straight into the river there. This is the Air Force version. This is the version I flew on the 31st of this year. And it just doesn't time out unless the bomber was somewhere for 17 minutes that they're not saying in the Air Force or Dodson's version. The ARTC reported times. This is times they report into towers as they're coming past. These are the exact times along there. 1543 hours, point number 1, North Alexandria. Blah, 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 goes on down through. Reported approaching to the beacon east of Field at number 5 there. And within a couple of minutes, Mayday heard in county. Bam. It was trying to see if you could keep going straight, there's Greater Pitt. It didn't make it to Greater Pitt. It passed, which means if you go to 17 minutes, Bob Johns thinks that what they did was they went straight ahead, get right on top of Johnstown. 17 minutes at 250 miles per hour, get you right on top of Johnstown and back in that time. That'll take up 17 minutes. Why turn down Johnstown if you're losing fuel or no fuel? Okay? And so it doesn't make sense. Was there something on board? You didn't want a civilian airport to see? Then you come up and you look at the county. You see county here is the approach to a wrong field. You come down, you come up they see they're coming towards County, they then turn and decide, no, we got to make it to Greater Pitt. So they reject County. This is the second airport turned down, according to the official. You look at the official versions. This is what happened. Then they turn, try to make it to County, go into the drink. Had they stopped at County, stopped at Johnstown, they would have made it. But they would never made it into the drink. And I'd like to have the next video real quick here, and then we're going to move on to questions and answers.
People who work on the rivers know about the river's mysteries. And Captain Jack Gessling has some theories about Pittsburgh's biggest river mystery, that B-25 airplane that disappeared into the Mon in 1956.
It would not be too difficult to find. We lost the stern wheel off the original Gateway Clipper up in the Allegheny River. We didn't know exactly where we lost it. We got a hold of a diver. That was a big story about the monster stealing the wheel off of the Clipper. But we found it in about 2 weeks, got it out of the river, put it back on the boat. It's still on the boat. That was a pretty good sized stern wheel. If we could find something like that, I'm sure you could find a B-25 or a plane of that size.
All this B-25 talk is about an aircraft that the United States Air Force says is still lying somewhere on the bottom of the Mon. It came in over the Homestead High-Level Bridge. Bob Johns, a senior research technologist at Allegheny Ludlam, describes the scene.
4:09 in the afternoon, January 31st, 1956. A B-25 bomber came out of the east, skimmed low just over the top of this bridge, crashed in the river out there. People on the bridge screeched their cars to a halt and ran and stood at this very railing and watched as the survivors came out of the cockpit and stood helplessly on top of the floating wreckage. And they watched it until it drifted out of sight down underneath the B&O and Glenwood Bridge. The plane drifted around the bend after crashing, drifted down along near the south bank of the river here, and right out in this area, sank with its nose pointing towards the south shore here.
What happened after the plane sank is the mystery. 2 crewmen drowned, and either 4 or 5 men survived, depending on whose story you want to believe. Bob Johns is a kind of freelance investigator and has studied and researched the incident probably more than anyone else. He's been on several TV reports, like this Channel 11 documentary done in 1978, and on numerous radio talk shows. He knows all the details, all the conflicting stories.
According to the Air Force, the plane is still there. According to eyewitnesses who stood on the bank and watched it being removed from the river, obviously it's not still there. The question is, if it was taken out the night of the crash, as some of these eyewitnesses state, the real question is, why? Why was it taken out so quickly, so secretly, and why does the Air Force maintain to this day that it's still in that river?
Bob Johns has written a book that he calls The Windmill Blinked, a look at the strange case of the Pittsburgh B-25. It's an unpublished manuscript, but contains detailed explanations of all his theories. Captain Jack Gessling wasn't in Pittsburgh when the plane crashed, but he's heard a lot about it.
The plane was taken out the same night, and I did talk to different river people who claimed that they seen the trucks, people that worked along the river that seen the plane being taken apart to pieces, the wings loaded on a flatbed and hauled out of here. And I personally believe it was taken out the same night because for some reason they didn't want anyone to know what it was doing in the river.
Some say there may have been nuclear weapons aboard, devices for germ warfare, or nerve gas.
The whole nerve gas scenario was brought out by a Corps of Engineers official who was later threatened off of one of the TV shows for trying to release that same information. I don't know what it was. I'm just as eager as anyone else in Pittsburgh to find out what it was. But something strange happened in Pittsburgh in 1956. It's not over.
The B-25 isn't the only mystery around Pittsburgh's rivers. A lot of people talk about a fourth river, an underground river that supplies the water for the fountain at the point. Marshal Fossil is a geotechnical engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers. He has a scientific explanation for this fabled underground waterway.
Well, I've heard about the Fourth River as long as I've been in Pittsburgh, and I think when I hear people talk about it, most of the time they're envisioning a river in a cave, an actual flowing stream that you could maybe even swim in or put a boat on, flowing through this cavern. And that isn't the case really at all. What we have here in Pittsburgh is under the level of the rivers, we have a very large body of sand and gravel that was left from the glacial times. And the pores in this sand and gravel are full of water that have a virtually limitless supply of water to them from the river here on the surface.
So, what this cross-section chart, cutting across an area near the point, is showing is that under the rivers, and under a thin surface layer of silts and clays, there's a geological layer of sands and gravels that can absorb and store water. Water from this layer is taken out through wells and is pumped up in the fountain. But it's the pumps that propel it into the air, not natural pressure. There's water underground near the point, but is that what you call a river?
Well, in the short answer, the word is no. There is no fourth river. There's only an extremely productive aquifer, is the geologic term for it, a layer of material that holds a great amount of water and from which the water can be withdrawn easily. But there's no flowing river under Pittsburgh.
Or did it? 4 crew members survived and 2 died that day. The mystery continues to fascinate folks in Pittsburgh, and now a high-tech recovery team is determined to put those rumors to rest. Liz Miles has the story.
The B-25 bomber that crash-landed in the Mon River near the Homestead Bridge on January 31st, 1956, has been a source of endless speculation and conjecture. Why did it crash? What was its mysterious cargo? Was it brought up by the government in the dead of night? Air Force Intelligence Officer Major Matt Pennslvania is looking for the plane, but not for the answers to those questions.
I personally do not believe there was a conspiracy. I don't believe there's anything special about this aircraft. I believe it was a very generic trainer on a very generic mission that had some problems.
Pennslvania, on his own time, is part of the B-25 recovery team. For the past 2 years, they've been searching for the plane using divers and high-tech sonar and satellite positioning. But they've also heard all the theories, like what the plane might have been carrying.
Okay, extra cargoes. We could start off basically with chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, or nuclear weapons components, another favorite one, mafia money, Las Vegas showgirls.
Ray Duquesne is writing a screenplay about the mystery. He has spoken to J&L employees who say the plane was covertly recovered from the crash site.
And that it was done at night, but there was the lock and dam system was used to slow the river up enough, and by morning time release the locks and dams. Nobody would know the difference.
He has also investigated the seventh man theory.
It came out that with the rescues that were going on here, there were several different tugboats. And when you count up the number of people pulled from the river, there was a seventh man.
But he doesn't buy the possibility that the seventh man was Howard Hughes, as some reports speculated.
No.
The series will continue until the mystery is solved. Matt Pennslvania believes he can do that by finding the mystery bomber at the bottom of the Mon. And anyone who has information on or is interested in the crash of the B-25 is invited to a party going on tonight until 9 o'clock at Rosebud in the Strip. The recovery group and Ray Duquesne would love to talk to you or answer questions. And this great computer-generated picture of the plane is available at Philmount Laboratories in Swissdale.
Final approach.
Yeah, it's kind of a mocked-up picture, but it's very good.
You know who did the meteorological report on that crash?
Yes, I do.
Joe Denard.
That's right.
Thank you.
Live. Okay. And so there's the other side of the story. You have people actively searching for it, and that needs to be told too. I just want to say I'm not officially part of their group, and they're not officially part of my group, and I'm trying to make a film, and they're trying to find a bomber. Okay, there's the final approach there. They don't make it into the river. Bang. And that's it for the slides. I think there's one final thing there. I think that Bob Johns has a final word. If it's not there, we'll skip forward to it. And that's it. I'll take a quick couple questions.
News Talkback on the Pittsburgh Cable News Channel.
the only place on Pittsburgh television you can call in with your feedback on the top stories in the news today. Pick up the phone and call the news team voted best in the state. Now, Channel 11 News, Talkback.
Good evening. Thanks for being with us on Talkback tonight here on the Pittsburgh Cable News Channel. I'm David Johnson, your host as always. Our number to call to Talkback to tell us what you think of the news is 333-PCNC. Numerically, that's 333-7262 to Talkback to give us your views on what you saw on the news tonight. Well, there's a lot of news happening today, but we're going to devote most of Talkback to one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in Pittsburgh history. 40 years ago today, an Air Force plane crashed into the Monongahela River. It's never been found. At least that's what some people say. Others, however, believe the government removed the plane from the river under the cloak of darkness for various reasons. Well, two people who are searching for the plane are with us tonight. First, let's go to Stuart Brown, who takes a look at this mystery on the Mon.
It was 53 feet long with a wingspan of 67 feet. Could they have secretly removed such a big plane from the river in the middle of the night? To this day, people in Homestead, where the World War II B-25 bomber crashed in 1956, believe there's a continuing government cover-up.
I'm serious. The government don't want you to know something you're not going to know.
In Giotto's Tavern, not far from where the plane went down, even folks who weren't born when it crashed think there's more to the story.
Why would 50, 60 different guys say that they seen it leave it on beds of trailers? That's the sort of lead that they couldn't find something like that then.
The Air Force says the plane simply ran out of fuel and crashed on its way from Nevada to Harrisburg. 6 crew members survived, 2 were drowned. Robert Shima is part of a volunteer group that's probed the rivers with high-tech sonar equipment for 2 years. So far, they've found nothing at 4 locations. The recent local floods could yield new clues. Still,
there always is the chance that it was removed either that night or at some time in the future by salvagers.
But bartender Barbara Fawcett isn't buying any of the theories.
The plane went down. It wasn't top secret. They didn't dig the plane out at night. There was no way. They didn't have the technology.
When the weather gets warmer, the researchers plan to take their equipment out on the rivers again in hopes of finally solving the mystery of the plane that went down here 40 years ago. Stuart Brown, Channel 11 News.
Although that river search has not yet found the plane, it has identified sunken barges, boat wrecks, and industrial waste. You see, I'm joined by 2 gentlemen here. They're on the far end, Stephen Byers, who's a computer consultant who obviously has a lot of interest in finding this plane, if it indeed is there. And right next to me is Ray Duquesne, who's an independent filmmaker, and you plan to someday make a film about the search for the plane. Let me just take both of you here, and whoever wants to answer first, go ahead. Why go to the trouble to search for this plane? Even if it is there, we don't know that it is for a fact. But why go to the trouble? Still in the river.
Yeah, I believe it's still in the river.
Ray is an independent filmmaker. Obviously, there's a lot to work with for a film. This could make a great documentary or movie.
Better docudrama. There's so much inherent drama in this that I'm going to go with the docudrama.
Okay.
I'm almost forced to. And there's a market out there for this. I, as a filmmaker, will take both positions and let the audience sort for themselves. Myself, there's so much credible evidence either way, though I tend to lean towards that it's not there.
Okay.
Myself.
Have you already shot some things? Are you on your way to making
We will be. The flood and...
Okay. I actually have some more stuff, but I'm going to just go right to questions and answers and call it a night here. I had something from Robert Johns. It was the final thing he did before he died. He died in 1991, 57. It's a little strange we get that, but you can see the movie too on there, why he might have died so young, strangely. Basically, I'm trying to do a film, and there's people trying to find a bomber, and I'm hoping I can get the film made before the bomber. You find the bomber, there's no film. So I'm on the side trying to do the film and no bomber there, to be honest. And it's for $5 million. I have one investor we're in negotiations with. We need a bunch more, and this and that area thing. And it's still. I can't tell you this much. At the end of my film, I can't give a solution to it. I just leave you as I'm leaving you tonight with just a lot more questions. And that's what we'll go to right now. So if we can bring up the house lights. Thank you very much for your patience. Okay, and also, would you guys interested in one or two questions too if somebody wanted to ask it? Okay.
Yeah, I just was wondering, if the government had the technology in 1956 to take this plane out surreptitiously, what would stop them from simply getting remnants from old B-25, putting them in the Mon River right now for something to find?
Oh, you could say, yeah, you could do anything, you know. You could put it on the moon too. We went to the moon, right? Thing is though, there was thing Robert Johns did find out that the DuPont was a lot of people saw a lot of glowing going on underwater that night. Now you hear this thing where people say, river people say, they're the river people, like there's some kind of Martians or something, but the river people didn't see anything. Well, yeah, there's a few there right now. I showed you tonight who saw things going on that night. DuPont had this chemical thing, this little bond thing. It was like almost like caulking. You put it around a metal surface underwater, light it, it would burn right through in seconds, right through sheets of metal. They could do it quickly and efficiently. They could do this thing. You didn't have to do a slow torch underwater.
Okay, but I'm saying, I guess
there was technology. This was available in '56. This DuPont stuff.
And my question is, if at some point they do find something down there, can we actually authenticate it is the
I tell all the searchers, I say, I wish you guys luck in finding the thing, but don't show me little pieces of plexiglass that's like a quarter, because tons of plexiglass was put down the river over the years, PPG, right? Show me an engine that looks like it's been there for 41 years and has the serial numbers on it. That's what I say.
What color was it?
The plane was an olive green, olive drab. This one did have the greenhouse in front. It did have the greenhouse. Some, even though it wasn't converted TBN25 or 25N, yeah, that's what they said on Perry's show.
Assuming it was carrying some sort of secret cargo, which wasn't wanting to be known, if it would have landed either at Johnstown to refuel or at County Airport, since you can refuel the plane without opening the, getting access inside of it, would not the crew just have kept the plane buttoned up, get the fuel it needed to get to Greater Pitt Air Force Base at Greater Pitt?
Yeah, but why take the risk?
What risk? Well, it seems to me apparently they took a bigger risk.
It did. That's the strangest thing, though. You know, obviously it was just, hey, they just had on their mind, military airport. You had the 54th Fighter Group, 112. Their Greater Pitt was a strategic air command base for decades. Yeah. Yeah, matter of fact, the 54th Fighter Group spokesman was in the press, speaking for several days during the incident. You had a great military presence there. I mean, you had guys sucked into plane engines while they're fixing them. It happened out there. I read this. So, you know, it just seemed like there's this, but then, you know, there's so many questions. I could go either way. There's that much evidence this way as there is that way. Until there's no bomber. Show me a bomber. I'll not show you a bomber. It's the nature of the beast. Thank you. Oh, you.
Was the destination near Harrisburg, or was it really Washington, D.C.?
That's what it was. Washington, D.C. Then the story changed to Harrisburg. Going to Washington, D.C. Then it just ended up being Harrisburg. But I have the papers. The first couple of days it was Washington, D.C. Dawson says it then. You have that press interview, and off to the sides are military people, okay, monitoring the whole thing. You can see Bill Burns, who's the one interviewing. He's not really doing very hard questions. He's actually leading him on. It's a very soft interview. There's no real hard things like, hey, what's this and what's that? And, you know, because that's the way things were in 1956. You know, hey, it's the government, patriotic, don't question. You have McCarthy. So, and yet this is the height of the Red Scare. So maybe if you have some kind of a covert extraction, and suppose there's something nuclear there. Well, it's not really much of a danger if you have something laying there nuclear. You can go up and bang on a nuclear head and it won't go off. People have done it. The thing is what's in people's minds. Bob Johns had this whole scenario of the death of Pittsburgh, where he had this nightmare people were just going to freeze if they had found out, or just gone out, there's something nuclear in the river. This is the height when people didn't know much about nuclear radiation. They just knew it destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It could eat you up. So there could have been this paper. So that's just some of the reasonings that went in. I can't prove it, though. I mean, I'll stand here right and tell you, I can't prove any bit of this, but those are all things that were available at that time, factors.
the Air Force is very protective with anything they want protected. And so if the plane was simply removed, then, like Bob Johns, would you have to do like back research with, what I'm saying is this is high top secret government information. With Project
Possibly.
and this.
It may not be too. But, Paul, you have something to say about Project Google?
Well, the original second man was identified. The original 7th man was named Tabak. He took off with the other 6. And at Selfridge, when he had to get to Washington, he had things to do. He was bumped off a flight at Selfridge. Even though this was his flight, he had to be somewhere in Washington. This is very important military duties. He was bumped off. He was replaced, I believe, by a different 7th man who was not Air Force, who was CIA. It could very well be that the Air Force had no idea what was going on at that time. The CIA had spooks running through all the armed forces, and when they did things, when the NSA did things, this whole alphabet soup that we talked about, they did things happened and stayed secret. But this Tabak was the original 7th man. He was bumped off the flight for someone else. I didn't get that 7th man, but I think he was all the rest of it.
We also have to be fair, the other side of the story is that these guys, you have too many chiefs and no Indians on the flight, and you have too many guys trying to give each other orders, they panic, they're running out of fuel, and they make a lot of serious mistakes. This is the other alternative, and it was just a bunch of human error. But I'll address both in the film. I'll address both